My love for street food has finally gotten the better of me. I ate some stuff 2 nights ago. It really messed me up. So now I'm in the process of nuking my intestines with what I assume is iodine chloride. I have no idea what it does, but one of the bosses at Cowba Farm said this stuff will kill everything in my guts. And we'll see how it works.
After leaving Antigua, I found myself facing a long day of uninspiring riding along the Pan-American highway once again. Traffic was often quite heavy and the road was poorly maintained in many sections. This added on top of the fact that I was feeling a bit ill made for one of the least pleasant days of riding I've had so far on the trip. But towards the end of the day, as I neared the border with Honduras, traffic started to thin out and the road conditions actually improved. One of the paradoxes I've encountered driving in Latin America is that the main road is often the least well maintained, and secondary roads are often quite well paved, and with much less traffic to boot. And as the road conditions improved, so did my spirits, and I rolled into the Honduran border feeling pretty alright. I had just started my paperwork when these guys rolled up. Luis, Dominic, and Tom here had just ridden their DR650s all the way to Panama, and now we're heading back home to California. Chatting with them made the time spent in the immigration line just fly by. I heard some great stories and got some useful information, including the fact that I should definitely not drive between the lanes of cars in Nicaragua because they had already gotten 2 tickets for doing just that. Or did they say Costa Rica? I can't remember. Anyway, I think I'll just keep lane splitting to a minimum for now. They also told me that there's a bar called Via Via in Copán Ruinas, owned by a fellow adventure rider, and he'll give out free drinks to anybody who's coming through on a motorcycle. So naturally I had to stop by and see what this was all about. Turns out it's true, but don't take my word for it, listen to the owner.
Hey guys, everybody on a motorcycle coming to Honduras, Copán, stop by Via Via, I'll buy you a Cuba Libre. Everybody on a motorcycle, so cheers guys.
Excellent.
When I mentioned that my tent was not waterproof, he straight up gave me a new one. And it is basically new. It's been used maybe 1 time. And while it is bulkier and heavier than my old tent, it promises to be much more comfortable.
Every fence post in this fence is alive. So I'm on my way to my second set of Mayan ruins. And as soon as I crossed the border into Honduras, it started raining last night. Promises to be a drizzly day, which doesn't bode well for my upcoming ride. So I'm 2 for 2 on the Mayan ruins in the rain. Hopefully it'll be deserted and I'll be able to get some great pictures. There's parrots everywhere. They're incredibly beautiful and incredibly noisy birds. I'm not so sure about the safety of walking underneath them either. Look like scarlet macaws, they're gigantic.
I'm starting to realize the shortcomings of not having a camera with zoom when it comes to filming wildlife. It's incredibly hard to get close to parrots when they're up in a tree. And I really wish I could have gotten better footage of this little guy too. I'm pretty curious as to what it actually was. My best guess is some sort of rodent of unusual size. But if anybody here can identify this animal, please let me know. It's said that the ruins at Copán house the most exquisite examples of stone carving that the Mayan civilization ever produced, including a veritable forest of deceased kings, all painstakingly carved into stone in their full royal splendor, and the hieroglyphic stairway, which is literally what it sounds like. Another fascinating part of these ruins is the fact that they have not been completely cleared of the jungle that once covered them. Everywhere you look, you can find stark reminders of the awesome power of natural systems over long periods of time. From the massive portions of the main pyramids that have been undercut and washed away by the neighboring river, to the unrestored temples which remain chaotic piles of root-heaved rubble. The Maya did hit on one way, though, to preserve things a bit longer in their actively destructive jungle environment, and that was, of course, to bury them under tons and tons of stone. The pyramids that we see here today were built in layers, each successive ruler adding his own on top of the last. In the nearby museum is a replica of a temple that was found intact inside of one of the pyramids. When it was discovered, much of the original paint was still visible on the surface. After I returned to my hostel, the persistent drizzle that had been going on all day started to let up a bit, and I decided to try and make a break for it.
It's time to break out the rain gear again. I guess it's not really raining, but it's definitely clouding pretty hard.
But by the time I made it to La Entrada, things had cleared up pretty nicely. I met up with my host Joel, who took me to his mother's house to learn a bit about how to make bread in a wood-fired oven. The process is pretty similar to what I saw in the bakery outside of Jalapa, just on a smaller scale. And the results were quite possibly even more delectable. Heading towards Zambrano, I was again presented with peaceful mountain roads with spectacular views and good pavement. Except for that one section with absolutely no pavement. Google Maps shows this as being a main highway, and Maps.me shows it not even existing in some places. The reality is that this roadbed has already been cut and graded to be a main highway. It just hasn't been paved yet, and it still needs a little bit of work in some places. And then, after some more pavement and some more dirt road, I arrived at the Leadership Center, which is a university-level business school for women out in the middle of the forest with lofty goals of self-sustainability. They had a small problem with their chickens not laying eggs anymore, so Madison, the woofer wrangler, and I went to work on building them a turnout where they could run around and eat green things. Once the chickens were no longer cooped up, so to speak, the daily number of eggs doubled from 7 to 14 over the span of just 3 days. We also helped some of the local workers construct a new wood-fired oven out of bricks and mud. It's a neat design that features a combustion chamber and chimney that almost entirely envelop a metal drum. And the locals have such great faith in this design, I think I might even have to try it myself when I get home. Another big part of the school is the coffee farm. The area is pretty large, but the plants are all still fairly young, so the amount of berries is nothing like the plants that I saw in Guatemala. But they produce enough that there's always a hot pot of coffee on the stove, and apparently it brings in a little bit of income for the school too. But they do have one of these nifty machines that removes the fruit from the coffee seeds, which we didn't have at the other farm. I also finally found some time to replace the leaky float bowl gasket on the motorcycle, but I didn't record most of it because I had an audience watching me. Turns out it's pretty hard to operate a camera, perform maintenance on the motorcycle, and answer technical questions in a language I can barely speak, all at the same time. So at the cost of some possibly useful footage, I completed the repair and turned my motorcycle into something that is no longer a mobile fire hazard. I felt like I could have stayed here forever eating delicious vegetables from the garden. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there may be chickens elsewhere in need of my assistance. So I said goodbye to my fellow woofers and I continued my drive south. The day started off pretty good. I avoided my first Central American dog attack with a timely application of excessive speed. And I managed to cross the river the second time without putting my foot down and completely soaking my boots. But unfortunately the fun couldn't last forever because the fact of the matter is all roads lead to cities. And while Tegucigalpa is no match for the sheer insanity that is the capital of Mexico, it still was no fun. After about an hour of breathing exhaust fumes and stop-and-go traffic, things did thin out again, and I found myself back on the windy and deserted mountain roads that I've come to cherish so much over the last month. As I pulled up to the Nicaraguan border, things immediately got confusing, but I was really happy to see that there was another motorcycle here. The license plate frame said, "Not all those who wander are lost." I soon identified the owner as the only other riding jacket wearing gringo for miles around. He said he'd rather remain anonymous, so I just took a picture of his bike. And then we happily proceeded to go get ourselves sprayed with a bunch of poison and wait in a very long line for a very long time. Seriously though, if that poison is so gnarly that that guy even needs ear protection, I'm not even sure I want it on my motorcycle. The upside, though, is that the poison did wash off all of the dust that's accumulated on my motorcycle over the last month, and it's now cleaner than it has been since I left Arizona.
So the border crossing here in Nicaragua took the longest out of all of the ones I've done so far. If you're trying to drive to Nicaragua, hire one of the guides at the border crossing. It'll go much faster.
That's all for now. As usual, if you have any questions or comments or advice or vulgar obscenities or anything really, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.